So I'd like to introduce tonight's presenter, Bob Egan, who has spoken many times to us over the years. Tonight's talk is on Mutiny on the Bounty. It is sponsored by the Library Foundation of Needham. So I am interested as well as to find out about what seems to be the greatest mutiny ever held. So without further ado, Bob Egan, go ahead.
Thank you, Gay Ellen. Mutiny on the Bounty, it's quite surely the most famous mutiny in maritime history. The Bounty was not she wasn't a veteran of glorious naval battles. If anything, she was an insignificant, nondescript vessel amongst a fleet of storied warships belonging to the most powerful navy in the world, England's Royal Navy. Her captain, actually, he was a lieutenant, William Bligh. He was a competent officer. He epitomized the standards of leadership expected from officers of the Royal Navy. He had a reputation of being a stern disciplinarian, but not as harsh as many of his peers. He really wasn't the worst guy on the lot. The crew was considered to be adequate, consisted of all volunteers, many of whom were looking forward to a voyage to the exotic island of Tahiti. Following a stay of nearly 5 months, the Bounty set sail from Tahiti on a voyage home. On April 28th, 1789, 24 days later, a mutiny took place. Bligh and 18 of his men are forced into a 23-foot open boat. On board the Bounty, the mutineers, under the leadership of Fletcher Christian, sail off and they're headed back to Tahiti. So what happened to the men in the open boat? What happened to the mutineers? What was the reaction of the Royal Navy when it learned that one of its ships had been taken over by mutineers? The answers come from Bligh's log and from Royal Navy records. William Bligh was a product of the Royal Navy. His entire life was dedicated to the Navy. This is the white ensign. Only warships and stations on active duty are allowed to fly the Royal Ensign. It is symbolic of the greatest Navy in the world. During the 1700s, England's Navy was equivalent to Google of today. The status and position of the Navy in English society was closely associated with concepts of wealth, power, and liberty. An island nation, England depended upon the Navy to protect her, and the English viewed the Navy with great favor, and they valued her as follows. The sea is our protecting element, and as long as Britannia rules the waves, nothing can hurt us. And rule the waves she did. Her reputation against foreign foes was unparalleled. Her enemies, the French, the Danes, the Spanish, the Dutch, they all fell to her power. In the years 1793 to 1815, England would lose 17 frigates to the French, of which 9 would be recaptured. During the same time frame, France would lose 229 frigates. British ships sailed all over the world, whether in convoys, exploration journeys, or simply showing the flag throughout the empire. Her bases covered the globe: Malta, Cape Town, Trincomalee, New South Wales, Gibraltar. This is the Admiralty Building. All decisions made affecting any ships or stations in the Royal Navy are made in this building. A board of admirals will meet every day of the year. Here's a picture. It's a rough sketch. It is of a dockyard. It's of a royal dockyard. The Royal Navy was very hesitant to farm out repair or building or construction of many of the warships, so they had their own Navy yards. This is one in Portsmouth. They were capable of meeting every possible need of a ship. Britain's Royal Dockyards were the largest industrial operations in the world at that time, and over 14,000 people were employed. Portsmouth was the largest. 1795, the Royal Navy consisted of 123 ships of the line, 160 cruisers, manpower, 99,600 men. Now, to man a fleet this size required a constant supply of manpower. Being an island nation, she was fortunate in that she would have adequate access to fishermen, to merchant seamen, to coastal traders and ex-Navy men. But enlistments would not be enough to satiate the need. They estimated 6,000 men a year would desert. So a policy of impressment went into effect. And this is a sketch of a press gang. Basically, press gangs were authorized by the government to go and to search for men who would be capable of serving as seamen, as sailors, who would have some maritime skills. It was never legal, but it was never ruled illegal also. And the rationale for the press gangs went back to the feudal days of the king, when if the realm was considered in danger, the king had the authority to call up all eligible males. So there was no law for it. There was no law against it. Now, the press gangs were not supposed to grab just anybody. They were supposed to grab somebody who could do the job at sea, who would have some skills, some maritime experience. The press gangs also would really rear their head in the cause of the naval war of 1812, when Americans took strong issue against American citizens being impressed on British ships. The Royal Navy, go back to this one for a minute. There was a very, very specific hierarchy in the Royal Navy. At the peak were commissioned officers. Commissioned officers receive their commission from the Admiralty. All receive their training in the Royal Navy. All have to have at least 6 years of service before they're promoted to a lieutenant. They're trained in navigation, seamanship, gunnery, but they don't need to be specialists. They don't need to know all the minutiae and all the details. What they are expected to be is managers, and they're expected to be leaders. Now, commissioned officers could be promoted to positions involving more than one ship. The social status of commissioned officers mirrored the class structure ashore in England. Next, you have the warrant officers. Now, warrant officers receive their commission from the Navy Board, and they're considered to be specialists in their field. Examples: the master. The master would be the senior warrant officer. He would be responsible for navigation, for setting the course of the ship, for advising the captain of any dangers. Basically, the master would be responsible for all ranks of the warrant officers. In rank, he would be considered equal to a commissioned officer, but after. Other warrant officers would be the surgeon, the purser, the boatswain, the carpenter, the gunners. Then moving down the line, you have midshipmen. Midshipmen are potential officers. They've got to serve at least 3 years in training, and they have to have 6 years service total before they can become a lieutenant. This is the pool of future officers. Many of them come from landed gentry. About 25% came from royal families or highly placed families. About 50% were from families of professional men. Family connections were used very often. You would be a midshipman starting at age 12 to maybe 16 or 17. And the midshipman would learn seamanship. They'd learn navigation and maintenance of the log and other skills. Next, petty officers. These are men who have a particular trade or skill. And then you get down to the lower ranks, the seamen, able seamen, common seamen. They have to know how to tie knots. They have to know how to reef the sails, how to heave the lead, how to row the boats, handle the pumps. They have to know basically how to do everything. And these are also very experienced men who have learned all the aspects of ship handling. The Articles of War. The Articles of War basically depict what will happen via discipline. The Royal Navy rests on two solid principles. One principle is duty. One principle is discipline. Duty tells you exactly what you have to do. Discipline tells you what happens if you don't follow the rules. This is a cat o' nine tails, and this is a major tool of the discipline. Now, the Articles of War will stipulate what the penalties are for various offenses or misconduct. And the penalties could be confinement, they could be flogging, they could be death. The most serious crimes against a member of the Royal Navy could involve mutiny or conspiring to mutiny. Desertion is another offense. Now, examples of the punishment were flogging, either for a minor offense or for a serious offense. If the crime was significant enough to rate flogging through the fleet, what would happen is the man would be chained, he'd be tied to a deck hatch, and he would be flogged in front of the crew. Now, in this sketch here, you have the Marines on the top, and they're in full uniform. You have the enlisted men watching below. You have the officers over here, and the man would be flogged. It could range from 25 lashes up to 300 lashes. There was a case of where a man was to be given 300 lashes, and at about 140 lashes, the surgeon said to the commanding officer, "Captain, he's going to die. You've got to stop." And the captain said, "Very well, we will." And they stopped the punishment. They allowed the man to heal, and several months later, they gave him the balance of the lashes. If you were to be flogged through the fleet, the same would apply, except you'd receive a certain amount of lashes on one ship. Then you would be lowered into a boat and rowed to another ship, brought on board that ship, and the bosun's mate on that ship would give you a number of lashes. And this would continue throughout the fleet, depending on the severity. Here's another example of flogging. Flogging was ultimately discontinued in the 1800s. The other principle, duty. Very, very simple principle. Knowing that every man will do his duty allows the captain or any officer to be able to depend on them and expect that all orders given will be carried out and will be carried out to the fullest. This is probably one of the most famous men in the entire Royal Navy, Horatio Nelson. On the eve of his biggest battle, he sent a message to the ships against just before they go into battle. England expects that every man will do his duty. It is not optional. This is a very, very glorified painting of Nelson. He is in the center. He's been wounded. He's being taken down below to be treated. Another picture of him. His famous last words, "Thank God I have done my duty." So between discipline and duty, the Royal Navy ran quite well. The Navy never thought discipline was a major problem. It thought it had a very fair system, and it worked. The sense of duty, of commitment to the mission, of doing the job right would be demonstrated by Bligh in all of his endeavors. This is Artocarpus incisa. In other words, this is the breadfruit plant. It was thought that if this plant could be brought to England into the West Indies, it would grow very, very quickly, and it would be a source of quick, nutritious food for the slaves in the West Indies. And the intent of getting the plants from Tahiti, where it was first discovered, comes from the suggestion by Joseph Banks. This is Joseph Banks. He was a very wealthy individual. He was very important. He was a botanist. He had been to Tahiti with Captain Cook. He was taken with the Tahitian culture. And as head of the Royal Society, he had very much influence with scientists, politicians. He was also a close confidant of King George. King George was very keenly interested in botany. Banks was a rock star. He was very, very popular. People liked to be with him. And once Banks said, "Yeah, I think we should send a ship to explore the feasibility of growing breadfruit," the deal was done. He was very pleased with being in the limelight. He was quite happy when he looked in the mirror. Captain Cook. Much of the knowledge about Tahiti and other islands in the Pacific was the result of exploration by Captain James Cook. Cook was a phenomenal explorer. Cook sailed, he had 3 journeys around the world. Cook and his peers were so responsible for the growth of the British Empire because they went where very, very few people had ever been before. 3 separate journeys, the green, the red, and the blue. And it shows you, if you look at the map, and it shows his journeys all over the world. He was an excellent mariner. He was an excellent cartographer. He drew charts of all the regions he visited, and he provided the Royal Navy with a significant advantage over other countries. And he was good with dealing with the natives. Developed very friendly relations with Tahiti. The Tahitians loved him. They thought, some of them thought he was a god, and they referred to him by the term Lono. Lono meant the highest form of loyalty. Here's a painting of Tahiti. Cook he spent a great deal of time learning the culture, and Banks was with him. One of the interesting things was when England would send a vessel out or an exploration party, they didn't just have mariners and military people. They had botanists, they had zoologists, they had geologists, they had scientists, they had artists, and they would try to glean as much information about the terrain, about the climate, about the wildlife, and about the culture, so that when they got back to England and they were going to send another journey out at some point, they had a pretty good idea of what they were getting into. This is William Bligh. On Cook's 3rd voyage, Bligh served as the master of the Resolution, Cook's ship. He was 21 years old, and Bligh turns out to be a first-class navigator, a very good seaman, and an excellent surveyor. And Bligh worshipped the ground that Cook walked on. He held Cook up above everybody. He thought the other officers were subpar. He had nothing to do with them. Bligh's fellow officers viewed him as being thin-skinned and intolerant. Bligh was present when Cook was murdered in Hawaii by hostile natives in 1779. 1787, Bligh is appointed as commander of a voyage to the South Seas. Certainly, this is a result of a recommendation by Sir Joseph Banks. Bligh is now 34 years old, average height, of a very pale, marble-like complexion. But he's got the reputation of being an excellent mariner and surveyor, all of this which was enhanced by his close affiliation with Captain Cook. This is his vessel. She's lying low and solid in the water. She's described as my little ship. She had 3 masts, a square stern, and a blunt nose. Her figurehead was a carved statue of a lady in riding habit. He had to be somewhat disappointed on this command. She was only 85.5 feet long. And as such, she would not warrant the rank of a captain, only a lieutenant. And Bligh was a lieutenant. She displaced only 220 tons. She was much, much smaller than any of Captain Cook's ships. Space on the Bounty is going to be at a premium. Banks is adamant that safety and needs of the plants must take a priority over all other conditions. Bligh will be forced to give up his cabin, most of his cabin, because that's going to be a nursery holding 700 containers of plants. His sleeping area will be 8 feet by 7 feet. His focus is going to be on getting the Bounty ready to sail. He's going to have her mast shortened. The hull is going to be sheathed with copper. He's going to add ballast, going to gather the crew. Now, since she's only rated as a cutter, she's not going to be authorized to have any Marines or any other commissioned officers. Her command structure will be limited to Bligh and his warrant officers, such as the master, the boatswain, the carpenter. He goes about, he fills the various openings. The master is an experienced seaman, John Fryer. He knows what he's doing. The surgeon is Thomas Huggan. A couple young midshipmen, Fletcher Christian, John Hallett. The midshipmen come from prominent families. Christian is from a very, very prominent family and quite popular, well respected. The crew is going to total 46 men. The ship is getting ready. The space is at a premium. There's going to be gear and supplies everywhere. Bligh has 3 boats, the ship's boats, and they're all on the deck. One of them, for launch, he has extended. One of the last things he does before departing is he has this launch increased in size to be 23 feet long, and it's got a depth of 2 feet 9 inches. This launch is probably going to be the most famous launch in history, ultimately. Bligh's space on board, small, cramped, not very well lit up, not ventilated very well. The forecastle, which is where the lower decks men are going to be, the common seamen, it's going to cover an area of 22 feet by 36 feet, ceiling heights of 5 feet 7 inches. 36 men are going to be sleeping in this area. But it's well within reason. Each man has the allocated space of 14 inches of sleeping space. That was a Royal Navy requirement. October the 9th, 1787, she's piloted down the Thames. She's going to get her guns, armament, and ammunition. Now she's classified as an armored transport. She's awaiting orders. She's awaiting favorable winds. This is in October. Finally, in December 23rd, she sets sail, immediately runs into terrible gales and delays. She got a late start, and this is going to have ramifications the further into the journey. Here's a sketch of the Bounty. This area to the left is going to be where the plants are going to be stored. Here's another picture looking down from the top. You see all of the various space that normally would be the captain's is it's going to, space is reserved for the plants. This is Mr. Fryer. He is the master. Fryer and Bligh are never going to mesh completely. Fryer is convinced that he should have this job. He could do it just as well as this guy. Bligh is a commissioned officer. Fryer is a warrant officer. So you've got a natural gap there. Fletcher Christian, handsome, popular, well-bred. The crew, he's held in high esteem by the ordinary seaman and the common seaman. Another picture of him, he's standing there. He's very regal looking. This is somewhat of a glorified sketch of everybody raising their hats to him. Christian, he's looked upon as a definite asset on the journey. So the voyage out, they leave Spithead on the 23rd of December. Here's a picture. This is a replica of the Bounty. Immediately they hit gales and storms. January the 5th, they reach Tenerife. They pull in, they reprovision, they do minor repairs. They sail on January 11th. Bligh's log. Bligh keeps a meticulous log. No matter what, he's always maintaining his log. It reads January 11th. Very pleasant weather, all sails set before the wind. Bligh realizes it's essential for the crew to be kept in good health and to be kept busy. He learns these lessons from earlier voyages with Captain Cook. He divides the crew into 3 watches of 8 hours each. Now, this gives the men a chance for 8 hours rest rather than the typical 4 hours on and 4 hours off. Bligh is adamant that the ship and crew are kept clean. He has the crew wash down all areas of the ship with vinegar, air their bedding on a regular basis, clothes are to be kept clean and washed, and the men are to be inspected, including fingernails, each Sunday prior to divine services. And he also orders all the men to exercise regularly, and he implements this by having the men dance each day from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. The men hate it. February the 9th, they cross the equator. He appoints Fletcher Christian as acting lieutenant. Now, this is a sign of favor towards Christian. It's almost a guarantee of promotion to lieutenant once the voyage is done. His log, quote, "My men are all active good fellows, much content and cheerfulness, always dancing from 4 to 8. No cause to inflict punishment." Bligh views punishment, scurvy, and sickness as signs contrary to a well-run ship. Well, sooner or later, discipline pops up. Quintal is one of the ordinary seamen. He's insubordinate. He gets 24 lashes. They're continuing the journey. March 20th, they approach the Falkland Islands. Weather turns, strong gales, exceedingly high sea, snow. They're having difficulty taking readings. The Bounty is fighting severe weather, trying to round Cape Horn. This is March 20th. April 3rd, the ship is no further north than a week ago. The Bounty struggles for 2 more weeks. Finally, they give up on April the 17th, and they head for the Cape of Good Hope. That will add 10,000 miles to the trip. They arrive in Cape Town on May the 24th. The Bounty's overhauled rigging, spars, all the damage incurred in the various storms. They take on new supplies of meat, cabbages, leeks, and a treat, fresh bread. They spent 38 days in Cape Town. Bly tours Cape Town with Fletcher Christian. He lends money to Fletcher Christian. Oh, there's another issue of punishment. 6 lashes for John Williams for neglect of duty. Well, they leave Cape Town, and their next stop is Tasmania. It's the red arrows here. Bly sends, whenever they could send a party ashore, they would, because they would refill the water barrels and they would cut and gather wood. You always needed wood. Well, ashore, a problem develops with Purcell. Purcell is the carpenter. Any reading I've ever done about ships in these days, carpenters always were tough guys to deal with. They always felt that they had a very, very special skill, that you really needed them. And Purcell was very insolent. He refuses to do the job on the shore detail. Well, he should have been court-martialed, but Bly has no Marines, and he's got no other commissioned officers. So the only authority is Bly. And rather than deprive the ship of an important position, he says, well, all right, you go back to work. You're going to be under Mr. Fryer directly. 2 days later, Purcell refuses to follow orders from Fryer. Bly reads the Articles of War, and he is absolutely furious. He cuts off the rations for Purcell. Purcell ultimately relents and he resumes his duties, but Bly is irate that his officers, his warrant officers, can't enforce his orders. Well, the crew is starting to notice the discord between Bly and his warrant officers. September the 5th, she leaves for Tahiti. She's running through more bad weather, fog, heavy rain, high seas. The log, in his log, he records the distance every day. 177 miles, 145 miles, 172 miles. By the time the Bounty reaches Tahiti, she will have sailed 28,086 miles. Relations between Bly and the warrant officers are deteriorating. Fryer, the surgeon, and others no longer dine with him. Fryer is accused of failure to do his duty. Bly reads the Articles of War to everybody. You can see the resentment building. And the crew notices, there are no secrets on an 85.5-foot ship with 46 men. The crew is really noticing the discord. Bly gets word of a terminally ill seaman. Seaman's name is James Valentine. There's no prior warning. Valentine dies on October the 10th. Bly is furious at the surgeon. Huggen is the surgeon. The best you could possibly say about Huggen, being open-minded, is that he was a worthless, drunken sot. He exhausted all of the liquor. He just wouldn't leave his cabin, his quarters. He just was a total failure. Problem Bly has is he no longer has a good record of perfect health among the crew. It gets worse. 2 days later, 3 men show signs of scurvy. Bly's beside himself. He's furious at Huggen. Bly takes over the diet of the sick men, and he gives them a diet of sauerkraut, malt, mustard, and vinegar to halt the spread of scurvy. The men do get better. October the 24th, the Bounty reaches Tahiti. One final chore. All of the men have to be inspected for the venereal complaint. All men are clean. Here's a depiction of the Bounty sailing into Tahiti. The natives are swarming to welcome her. They're bringing fresh fruit, hogs, coconuts, flowers. They are euphoric to see this ship. They are thinking Lono might be on board. The contrast between the English and the Tahitians was very stark. The Tahitians were tan, slim, perfect white teeth, smiling, and very, very happy. The English were dirty, bow-legged, scarred, and unshaven. Many of these natives remember the last visit of Captain Cook in 1769. And again, they revered him as a god. Now, Bligh said, don't mention a word about Captain Cook's death. I will handle it. Once ashore, Bligh would visit with the native royalty, and he would explain to them why the Bounty is there and what they wish to take back, which are breadfruit plants. And the various chiefs look and they're all happy and they willingly agree to, yeah, you can have the grapefruit plants, but what do you really want? And Bligh says, no, that's what we want. Well, the chiefs, they don't know why, but they go, fine, this is great. So Bligh, they agree to the, giving the breadfruit plants. Bligh sets up a compound that is going to serve as a gathering place and a nurturing place for the breadfruit plants, and they will be tended by his men. It's to be a secure area, and no natives are to be allowed access. Fletcher Christian is going to be in charge. Bligh learned earlier voyages with Cook that dealing with the natives, you have to have a regulated trade policy. In other words, you can avoid the chaos in trading items, but you've got to have a plan and it's got to be controlled. So he set up a code of trade for his men and their dealings with the Tahitians. And there are going to be 6 items. No man is to suggest Cook has been killed by the natives. No man was to mention our need for breadfruit. Only I will tell the chiefs. Each man is to gain the goodwill of natives, treat them with kindness, not use force to retrieve stolen items, and never to fire their weapons except in self-defense. Each man is to ensure that weapons or tools under their care are not stolen. No man is allowed to trade any part of the king's stores, and a proper person will be appointed to conduct trade. All boats must be empty at the end of the day, and these orders are nailed to the mast. Now, life ashore is highly appealing. Almost every one of the men would make friends with the natives. These friends would be called Tayos, and the Tayos would take these natives to their homes and their families. The native woman would spend the night aboard the Bounty. All of the men would have sexual partners. The one downside would be the spread of venereal diseases. Now, as time goes on, the men become more adapted to the native life. Relations with the Tayos are becoming closer. The men are becoming tattooed in the Tahitian style. Common law wives are numerous. Sooner or later, it would be inevitable that discipline amongst the crew is going to wane. With this greater amount of freedom and comfort, Bligh would see an erosion of order. Specifically, increase in theft by the Tahitians. Cases of insolence and insubordination and dereliction of duty increased. In January, 3 men deserted. Bligh gathers the native chiefs and he says basically he wants their help in getting these 3 deserters back. This was a technique that Captain Cook used. And he also said, we're going to keep 3 of your men hostages until the deserters return. Ultimately, the deserters returned. Other problems, failure of command, weakening discipline are happening. Sleeping on duty. New sails for the ship are allowed to mildew. The ship's cable is cut. The timekeeper is allowed to run down. That is almost a cardinal offense. And a compass from the ship is stolen. So all of these examples, Bligh is citing as things his officers are not doing their job in. And he becomes more and more public about chastising them. And the crew is noticing it. Bligh says, quote, such neglectful and worthless petty officers never was in a ship as are in this. Their conduct in general is so bad. They have drove me to everything but corporal punishment, and that must follow. But he's got no warrant officers. What happens is warrant officers and midshipmen cannot be flogged. He's got no Marines. The only discipline he has is his own. Meanwhile, the plants are getting healthier and healthier. February and March are spent on getting the ship ready for the return. Plants were all stored on board. The ships recaulked, reprovisioned with stores, sails amended. The monsoon had started adding to the sense of gloom felt by many of the men. They would soon be leaving their friends, lovers, and future children, and a lifestyle of relaxation. Ashore, the natives sense this, and tears and wailing are constant. Bligh thanks the tribal leaders for their kindness, and he sets sail on April the 5th. On board, 1,015 breadfruit plants. The Bounty has been at Tahiti for 23 weeks. They're headed home. This is what they're leaving. I mean, an absolute beautiful, beautiful paradise. Here's a picture of Bligh, portrait of Bligh gathering the tomatoes, the breadfruit. All right. So when they left, they headed westward. They're on their way home. Heavy rain, but the crew was in surprisingly good spirits. A week out, she came across an unknown island, Waitutu, which was too difficult to go ashore. At this point, the journey home is starting to show friction between Bligh and the officers. Bligh chastised Christian for poor performance, and Christian responds, "Sir, your abuse is so bad that I cannot do my duty with pleasure. I have been in hell for weeks with you." Ship continues on and they come up to an island, Anamuka. This is the last place where Bligh had visited with Captain Cook on Cook's last voyage. They lower the boats. Bligh sends 2 work parties to gather wood and water. Christian is in charge of the watering party, and they soon find themselves harassed by hostile natives. And they realize they've got to get out. And they head back. During the confusion, it turns out an anchor for one of the boats and a spade was stolen. Bligh's furious. And he holds several of the native chiefs hostage pending return of the items. He accuses Fletcher Christian of cowardice in allowing the goods to be stolen. Christian says, "We had weapons, but you forbade us to use them." Relations getting worse. On the evening of the 27th of April, Bligh comes across another issue. Sorry. Comes across another issue. He's looking at a pile of coconuts that are stored on deck. And he thinks some of them look like they're missing. He asks all of the officers, where are the missing coconuts? And he ends up by placing the blame on Fletcher Christian. Christian answers Bligh, I do not know, sir, but I hope you don't think me to be guilty. In a rage, Bligh says, yes, you damned hound, I do. God damn you, you scoundrels. You're all thieves. I'll make half of you jump overboard before we reach the Endeavour Straits. He orders the grog rations to be stopped and the yam ration to be 1/4 of what it is. Christian is shattered by the news. He's on the brink of tears. He complains to one of the men who says words to the effect to him, hang in there, it won't be much longer. Discontent is spreading. That very same night, Bligh seems to have calmed down, and he invites Fletcher Christian to dine with him. Fletcher says, no, thank you. The next day, April 28th, Bligh retires to his cabin at 10 p.m. Christian relieves the watch officer at 4 a.m. Shortly after, Christian, Churchill, Mills, and Burkitt, all with arms, awoke Bligh and they force him topside. Bligh is wearing only a nightshirt. He's tied securely, and he's taunted by several of the men. They want to kill him. The men hate Bligh. Christian held the rope securing Bligh, and he points a bayonet. As the launch is lowered, men who are loyal to Bligh were sent overboard. Bligh pleads to Christian. Consider, Mr. Christian, I have a wife and 4 children. Christian responds, that is the thing. I am in hell. I am in hell. The launch is loaded with 18 men and Bligh. Several men considered loyal to Bligh are left behind because they can't fit in the launch. Again, she's 23 feet long, 6 feet 9 inches wide. For supplies, 150 pounds of bread, 32 pounds of pork, 5 quarts of rum, 6 bottles of wine, and 28 gallons of water. As they're being cast off, the men are throwing the breadfruit plants overboard. Bligh screams to the mutineers, never fear, my lads, I'll do you justice if I ever reach England. He's 35 years old at the start of the open boat journey. In the boat are 18 men with him, some as loyal as could be, some would despise him. They head west toward the Friendly Islands. Bligh remembers visiting that with Cook on Cook's 3rd voyage. At that time, they were well received by the natives. On May the 2nd, they land at an island called Tofoa. They're met by natives who appear to be menacing and hostile. And the natives are gathered around the men. And each native has stones. They each are holding a stone in each hand. And as the tension increases, as the discussions deteriorate, the natives are pounding these rocks together in unison. And basically, it's a sign of a pending attack. And Bligh says, we've got to get out of here, man the boats. And they all race to the boats, and they get into the boats. But in this sketch, one of the men, John Norton, is killed by the natives because the boat was still anchored, and he gets out to cut the cord, and the natives grab him and kill him. So the natives are in their war canoes, and they're chasing the launch, and they're gaining on the men in the launches. And Bligh says to some of the men, "Take off your hat. throw it overboard, take off your shirt, throw it overboard. And they throw these pieces of clothing overboard. And what happens is the natives slow down to pick up the pieces. And by doing such, the English are allowed to escape. And they get back and they make it safely back to the boat. Bligh tells the crew, "We will now head for Timor, which is a Dutch settlement in the East Indies." They're going to be in the boats for 26 days before they reach a small island in the New Hebrides. The men would forage for oysters and berries. They would sleep on dry land. They would stretch their cramped limbs and be somewhat refreshed. Bligh would call this, excuse me, Restoration Island. They don't want to leave, but he knows they have to leave. They can't stay there. They've got to leave. June 4th, they have cleared the Endeavour Strait and the Barrier Reef. This chart doesn't really show it, but basically they're clearing the tip of Australia. Again, he knows where he's going because of his journeys with Cook. They're headed 1,100 miles to the west to this Dutch settlement. And on June 14th, they make it. They pull into the trading post of Kupang. It's a 48-day journey in an open boat. They have covered over 3,600 miles. They've lost only one man. That was to the natives. Here's a sketch of the Dutch settlement. Here they are explaining to the Dutch. The Dutch were competitors, but they were also Europeans. And the Dutch at first can't believe it, but they understand and they give shelter to Bligh and the men. They'll spend 2 months recovering. Bligh will file a very detailed report and a description of the mutineers. He will buy a small schooner and will take the men from Kupang to Batavia. Ultimately, he will sail to England. He will be back in England and presented to King George, March 1790. Now, at the start of this journey, Bligh and his men were probably in the best possible health they could have been. They've spent almost 6 months ashore, enjoying sun, love, fresh food, a reduced work schedule, and minimal discipline. This respite would help them stave off both physical and mental collapse as their journey lengthened. For the first 3 weeks, it consisted of driving rain and heavy seas. And while the cold and soaked clothing made them miserable, it was a blessing in disguise. As had the sun been broiling, their limited supply of water would have been devastating. While the men did not realize it, every one of them would be affected by diseases and ailments years later that had their origins in these wet, cramped, storm-tossed days. And a constant fear of the boat capsizing due to storms, constant rain, forced the men to bail with only coconut shells. And that would take its toll mentally and physically. Some of these men hate him. Some of them just want to give up. But his leadership is going to prevail. He said to them when they were drenched, when they were wet, "Take your shirt off, put it in salt water, wring it out, it'll dry quicker." For rations, he was a stickler for rations. They cut a coconut in half, they tie a string to it and drape it over a dowel. 25 musket balls equals 1 pound. The daily ration would be 1 musket ball or less than an ounce of bread and pork. He taught the men how to navigate. He taught them how to read and measure the distance covered. Navigation skills were superb. And he never wavered. No matter how much they pleaded for more rations, he would not relent. He was an excellent cartographer. No matter how bad conditions were, he constantly took notes of shoreline and features. So, what happens when the Royal Navy gets word of the mutiny? Very fast, specific response. This is a picture of a 24-gun frigate. It's the Pandora. Plans were made at once to send this ship to capture and bring to justice the mutineers. Her captain, Edward Edwards, was no stranger to the crime of mutiny. On an earlier command, he had stopped a plot to mutiny. 5 men were hanged, 2 were sentenced to 200 and 500 lashes, and the leader was hung in chains. The Pandora arrives at Tahiti on March the 23rd, 1791. 14 mutineers were captured and locked up below decks. What happened was that the Bounty and the mutineers went back to Tahiti, and they stayed in Tahiti for some time, but ultimately Fletcher Christian knew the Royal Navy would be after them. So the Pandora catches 14 mutineers, and they bring them on board the Pandora. Now, on the way back, she strikes a reef and she sinks, taking with her 4 prisoners and 31 crew members. The prisoners are kept in this box built on the deck, aptly named Pandora's box. Edwards would not allow the men to be released. He would not allow them to have their chains. But finally, some of them got free, but the bulk of them were shown no mercy, and they went down with the ship with 31 crew members. And it's ironic because they are now forced to take the same journey that Bligh took in the open boat. There was a trial back in England, and at the time there was a very active campaign to paint Bligh as the villain, that the mutineers were forced into such a drastic course by his unrelenting abuse. A number of the accused would use powerful family connections to plead their case. Regarding Fletcher Christian, some sympathizers suggested that he was a free spirit rebelling against a corrupt society. You know, this was the age of Rousseau and the dawn of the Romantic Age. Court findings, 6 men were guilty and 4 were acquitted. 3 ended up being hanged. The king would pardon men from good families. On October the 29th, a gun was fired on board HMS Brunswick to announce preparations for executions. Ship's company is formed on deck. On either side of the ship, the guilty were hanged and their bodies were left for 2 hours. Bligh would make a second voyage to Tahiti on the Providence, another ship, to bring back the breadfruit. Planned to use it as a food source did not prove to be viable. He was given command of another ship, a 54-gun frigate, which suffered a mutiny in 1797, but he was found innocent of that charge. He didn't have a happy career. He was sent to New South Wales, Australia. Excuse me. He was a victim of political corruption, forced to resign. He died at age 64 in 1817. Excuse me for a drink here. So, what happened to the mutineers? This is a painting of an island, which it is Pitcairn's Island. is a picture of it taken from the air. Very, very difficult place to land a boat. Only one small area where the boat could actually pull in. And she was nowhere near where everybody thought she would be. She was totally, they were just sailing away looking for a safe haven, and they came across this island. And they just said, let's do it. They landed on Pitcairns. We know what happened on board the Bounty. We know what happened in the open boat journey. But for Pitcairns Island, we really don't know a lot about what happened until somebody else discovered Pitcairns. And for years, they were completely off the grid, if you will. These are illustrations from the book, The Bounty Trilogy, done by N.C. Wyeth in the 40s. So what happened was the Bounty ends up at Pitcairns, and they had actually kidnapped, when they left Tahiti, some native women and some natives and children. And they sailed away without many of these natives realizing what was happening. And they sailed on until they finally arrived in Pitcairns. And at Pitcairns, while it was a respite, while it was a safe haven, things would deteriorate. Here's Fletcher Christian with his wife. It's an idyllic painting. He's happy. They're together. Here's a beautiful scene on a tropical lagoon. But things deteriorate. The men start fighting amongst themselves. And some of the men say, why should we do any work? Let's let the natives do it. And one thing leads to another. And they turn on each other, and different factions turn on each other. And some of the Tahitian men are furious and mistreated, and they rebel against the mutineers. Christian says, we've got to burn the boat because nobody's ever going to leave here. This is a sketch of Christian. He's killed by a Tahitian. It's just total mayhem, total bloodthirsty. And it's just, they kill all of themselves, except there's only one survivor. And here he is. His name is John Adams. And he and the native survivors and these children will grow. How they're discovered is an American whaling ship is sailing along, and they come across this island. It's not on the charts, and they see smoke from campfires, and they realize it's inhabited, and they pull up to send a party ashore. And to their surprise, there's a boat that comes out from the island, and there's a couple of men in the boat, and one of the boat stands up and yells to the American whaler, do you know Fletcher Christian? And they are astounded because they thought maybe this was a Spanish possession or something. And this is how the descendants, the mutineers, are found. So they lower a boat and they see the village. They see it's a very well organized village. It's got a chapel, neat, it's amazing. Nobody knows anything at all about this. Well, ultimately, the American whaler goes and they file a report with the British, and the British don't really buy this. And they go, no, that's really not accurate. Well, several years later, a British ship happens upon Pitcairn, sends a boat ashore, and they see the one remaining survivor who's even older now, and he tells the story. But seeing the fact that there's a Bible and there was religious growth on the island, Christianity, this becomes a great cause celeb for missionaries. And when word reaches England, Bibles are sent over and supplies and everything. And that basically happens. People still live on Pitcairn's Island. It's got a checkered past, but basically that is the end of the greatest mutiny and the longest open boat journey in the world. So Gail, and I'll be glad to take questions if people have any.
All right, Bob, if you'd stop sharing screen, that will be much easier.
So I'll put, yeah, hold on one second. Yep,
There we go.
we good?
We should be good.
Okay. Any questions out there? Timmy? Marsha? Are they all muted?
They can unmute themselves if they so choose.
Okay. I mean, I'll be glad to field any questions. Certainly be glad to thank you all for your patience. I bounce around a bit. Should I click?
Very, very interesting and good.
Oh, thank you, Marsha. It's a long story, but you know. Anyway,
Very good, Bob. Martin Walter, thank you.
Martin, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I apologize for showing the wrong pictures sometimes, but it's all technological success.
Yeah, very good.
Good to see you, Martin. Thank you.
Joan adds compliments too.
Well, 2 for 2 is quite good. Thank you.
Good job, Bob.
Thank you, Timmy. Appreciate it. Oh, thank you, Paula. Oh, my goodness. Well, we've got attendees from North Carolina, South Carolina also, so Maine
Excellent.
and South Carolina and Maine. So, all right. Anybody else, or should we give you folks a chance to relax? And thank you, Steve.
I'll sleep all tonight and dream of it.
Well,
Yeah, Paula's got a question, Bob.
yeah, Paula, the far and away, the two best sources. First is the Bounty Trilogy by Nordhoff and Hall. That was 1940, and that's like a 3-section book. Very, very good. But equally as good is a book by a woman, Caroline Alexander, who is absolutely spot on. Her book is called The Bounty, and it is superb. I would probably recommend hers more so than the trilogy. She also wrote a book on Shackleton, you know, in the South Pole. So, okay. Anybody else? Hi, Joan.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi,
Good.
Joan.
Very interesting. Hi, Marcia.
There we go.
I let Martin have the computer to watch. I was watching from the side.
Oh, okay. Well, I thank you all for your questions and patience. So
Oh, it was very interesting. Thank you.
you're
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you.
Deborah, I don't know if my sister's still on or not. I don't. Hey, Deb.
We're here.
How are you, Debbie?
We're doing well, thank you. No makeup Monday, but you did a great job and it's always intriguing.
Thanks, Deb.
You're welcome.
Oh, I got a question from Paula Beasley. When's my next lecture? I'll have to talk to Gay Ellen Dennett. I promise I'll let you know, Paula.
Let us all know.
Well, thank you. I shall. Dr. Corcoran? Well, okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for thank you for coming aboard.
Nice to be welcomed aboard.
Thank you, sir. You could be the surgeon on the next voyage, you know.
Yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
All righty. Okay,
We are going to leave, but thank you.
you're very welcome, Joan. Good to see the both of you.
Yes. Ditto. Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Marcia. Appreciate it.
Great job, Bob.
Thanks, Debbie. All right.